Alrighty, folks, thank you so much for joining us today. Can we just start with positive affirmations for Cole? Thank you. Cole's going to give us an awesome presentation that is going to be a super cool synopsis of his thesis work, but of course, not all of his thesis work, but we're going to hear some amazing things about Severance today. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A after the presentation, so if you want to write down some thoughtful questions, please do. If you want to write down some gotcha questions, please don't. And after that, we'll go ahead and ask that the general audience step outside for a bit while the committee deliberates. And then we will come to a decision, which I'm sure will be amazing. So with that, Cole, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. We have a good crowd today. This is awesome. It's going to be a good day. So today I'm defending my thesis entitled "The Work is Mysterious and Important: Biopolitics, Corporate Culturalism, and Emotional Labor in Apple TV's Severance." We're going to be covering a lot of content today, so please try to be sure to enjoy each fact equally. So I want to start off today by asking a question. How many of you have a job or have had a job? Show of hands. That's basically all of you. Cool. I argue that one of the most universal human experiences is the workplace, and by extension, jobs themselves, right? And as a result, the workplace has permeated our culture, everything from memes on social media to more traditional forms of content like movies and television shows. Case in point, all of these are from a movie or a TV show, right? And so one of the more recent examples of a workplace television show is, of course, Severance. How many of you know what the show is about or have at least heard about the concept, have seen it, watched it? Great, this is most of you. This will be easy then. So Severance is a show released on Apple TV Plus in 2022, and the show is about a group of employees who have undergone a medical procedure that has surgically split their memories into two distinct selves. So on the one hand, we still have their personal non-work self, but then we have this new persona, you could say, that is their workplace self. And these are known as their innie, or their workplace self, and their outie, or their home or non-workplace self. And so the interesting thing about this is that when they're at home, they have no memory of the work that they do at Lumen and vice versa, right? When they're at work, they don't know who they are in the outside world. All of their personal memories stay with their outie. And so all of the severed employees work for Lumen Industries on this severed basement floor. And so think of Lumen kind of like, like Apple, right? Like Lumen, or like Apple, Lumen is a mega corporation whose inner workings are not overly transparent to the public, right? We don't know a lot of what they're doing. We don't know a lot of what they have their hands in, what they're working on, right? A lot of that is obscured from the public. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a second. And so as for main characters, I'm going to go on the left-hand side image here from left to right. We have Irving, Dylan, Helly, and Mark. These four employees make up the Macro Data Refinement Department, otherwise known as MDR. And then on the right-hand side, we have the woman sitting at the desk. Her name is Miss Cobell. She is the severed floor manager. And the gentleman behind her is named Mr. Milchick. And he is what we would consider to be the supervisor, or he's handling the day-to-day operations of the severed floor. And so the main argument to my thesis is that Severance presents a new labor regime that I have termed as severed labor. So what does that mean, right? Well, it means a lot of things. Like Dr. Herring said, I won't be able to cover all of it today, but we're going to go over just a few, right? So the first one is labor. There's many forms of labor that the severed floor utilizes and implements, but I'm just going to go over a couple right now. The first one is immaterial labor, and that is a form of labor that does not produce a material good or item. It produces an immaterial good or item. Some of you might think that immaterial labor has only existed so long as the internet has existed, because that is usually what we consider to be immaterial labor. but in fact, it has existed for much longer than we might realize, right? Case in point, teachers. They're communicating knowledge to their students. And a lot of computer science majors is another example, right? A lot of what the work that they're doing is on their computer, it is in a digital format, it is not producing a material good. And then another interesting one is call center operators, right? They're communicating or transferring information to whoever is on the other line. And then the last two we have here is emotional labor and affective labor. These share some similarities, so I'm kind of going to go over them kind of together. So emotional labor is the ability to control our internal emotions to produce a state of mind in others. This one is the more common form of the two. And emotional labor is more often seen as unconscious or an unconscious form of labor. So say I'm talking to you, you immediately smile and start nodding your head, showing me that you're listening. That is a form of emotional labor because you are creating a state of mind in yourself, and then that creates a state of mind in me that, yes, you are listening to me. I'm not just spewing nonsense, right? And then affective labor is a form of labor with the intention of creating or modifying emotional experiences. And this one is more purpose-driven, right? And it's more commonly seen in the workplace. So for an example of this, say I work in the service industry, I work in food service, right? I have a customer who comes up to me and they're irate, right? They're yelling, screaming, cursing, swearing, all that fun stuff, right? And me as the employee, I cannot talk to them in the same way they're talking to me, right? Because, well, number one, I get fired. But number two, most importantly, is that it wouldn't solve the problem. So instead, I have to regulate my emotions. I have to put on a smile and nod and understand in order to de-escalate the situation, right? So that's what effective labor is. And then getting into memory management, we have memory work. And this kind of goes into the forms of labor that we just talked about. Memory work is the labor of memories, or this concept that memories play an important role in the construction of ourselves, right? Through our life experiences, through creating, storing, and then recalling those memories. That has a great impact on who we are as people. And then the last one, this one might be my personal favorite, is human enhancement, which is, I'm going to read this off because it's a big definition. The use of technoscientific and biomedical advances to improve human performance. Now you might be thinking to yourselves when you hear about human enhancement, that's just science fiction nonsense, right? Like human enhancement, that's years, decades even in the future. But if we look at this definition, right, human enhancement is everywhere. I argue that it is something that each of us engage in some way, shape, or form every day, right? So human enhancement can be broken down into physical and cognitive forms. For physical, we have things like hearing aids, right? Being able to enhance our existing ability to hear for those who are hearing impaired. And then prosthetics, right? If you lose a leg and you get a prosthetic leg, that is a form of human enhancement. You are enhancing what you already have. And then for cognitive, right, we have stimulants. So this can mean caffeine. I'm sure all of you had some kind of coffee, tea, right, case in point. I know for me, I've had my fair share of caffeine this morning. And then we have medication, right? So this can be vitamins, prescription medications, as well as ibuprofen, Tylenol, things like that. And so all of these concepts in part make up severed labor. And I argue this regime is important because it helps us understand a few things about our everyday lives, right? Number one, going back to human enhancement, right? I feel like every day there's a new energy drink, a new coffee, a new something that boasts, more milligrams of caffeine than has ever been put in this drink. It's turbo, it's exciting, right? But then secondly, and this one might be the most important, it highlights the biopolitical dynamics between worker and employer. It highlights other bioethical ramifications as well. And we're going to get into more of what that means here in a second. And so let's talk about first macro data refinement. What is the labor that these employees are doing, right? What is it all about? And rather than me talk about it, I'm going to have my man Mark S. talk about it here.
This is the Sienna file. Now, all the data you see falls into one of 4 essential categories. And we group each line of code and then sort it evenly between 5 digital buckets.
Party.
Just poke around first, use the arrows. Right.
Should this mean something to me?
No, all the data comes from upstairs, fully encoded.
Then how do I categorize it? What?
Each category of numbers presents in such an order as to elicit an emotional response in the refiner. Cat 1 numbers, for example, feel a certain way on sight. They'll be sort of disconcerting, scary.
Scary.
I know.
My job is to scroll through this spreadsheet and look for numbers that are scary.
It sounds dumb, and Mark said it dumb.
Are the numbers bloody? Do they chant?
Doesn't make sense till you see it, and it takes a while to see.
And so like Mark mentioned, that is about as much information as they are given in terms of the labor that it is that they are doing, right? All they have to know is what the numbers elicit in terms of an emotional response, and then how to categorize those numbers and where to put them in those digital bins. Macro data refinement is one of the more interesting aspects of Severance because I argue that it is using 2 forms of labor at the same time in a way that I don't think has ever been done before, which would be immaterial labor and affective labor functioning at the same time within macro data refinement. So we've talked previously about immaterial labor and affective labor, right? Immaterial labor is the form of labor that does not produce a material good or item. Obviously, the work that they're doing is immaterial. They're sitting at a computer, and for all we know in season 1, that is what it is producing an immaterial good of sorting the numbers where they need to go. And then that second component, right, is affective labor. Affective labor is the more interesting one because when you apply it to the work that they're doing, it's the numbers that are the subject that is producing that emotional response in the refiner, right? So for example, the first time we just saw the scene where Helly is taught what MDR is, and then in a later scene, when she finally sees what the numbers mean, she's emotionally kind of caught off guard because I don't know about you guys, but I don't think me seeing the number 7 or the number 1 or anything is inherently scary, right? This is a new experience for her and is a new experience for really anybody. And so next we get into this idea of biopolitics, which is a mode of power that directly governs, manages, and monitors life. So the world of Severance, I argue, has created a sort of biopolitical prejudice against innies from an outie perspective, right? There's multiple scenes throughout season 1 that show that the outies do not consider innies to be deserved of the same rights or the same, decision-making as themselves. Everything down from the moment they are created, right? Because it was the outies' decision to bring them into this world. They were brought into this world without their permission. And so an excellent example of this is in a scene where Helly has attempted to break out of the severed floor multiple times. She's obviously not happy with the fact that she's going to be held prisoner for the rest of what is her existence, her life. And so eventually her outie records a video message for her to watch, and in the video, her outie is scolding her about lashing out and tells her the facts of life, right, or her life. And it culminates in this moment where Helly tells her, I am a person, you are not. I make the decisions, you do not. And this is really impactful moment. And it also gets into the bioethical ramifications of this, right? Because in a way, her outie has a biopolitical hold over her own innie, over herself in a way, right? And so another example of these bioethical concerns is in the break room. Now you might think to yourself, hey, that's great, right? Any employee who feels like things are overwhelming, they can go to this room and take a load off, take a break, right? No, That's not what the break room is. The break room, in a very literal sense, the word break is to emotionally, mentally break employees who have misbehaved. So Helly is eventually sent to the break room, and she sits down at a table, is hooked up to a polygraph machine, and Mr. Milchick sits across from her and has her read a statement of apology. And she gets through reading it once, and then Mr. Milchick tells her, "You don't mean it, read it again." And that is repeated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And as you can see in this GIF, this is a moment where Helly reaches her breaking point, pun intended. And so this gets into an idea that I've identified as surface acting versus deep acting within, excuse me, within workplace culture, right? It's this idea that surface acting modifies expressions while deep acting modifies feelings, right? So surface acting can be an example of, you're like we were just talking about before with affective labor, right? With putting on a face, smiling and nodding when somebody's, upset at you, you're faking your emotions. But deep acting is you're modifying your actual internal feelings in order to, reach the means to an end. And so in this case, I argue that the break room is enforcing a deep acting state of sorrow or remorse in the employee who is misbehaving. And so next we move on to corporate culturalism. Like many corporations, Lumen uses a lot of corporate culturalism techniques in order to control their employees. Corporate culturalism is the method of control or power with the purpose of shaping or regulating employees. Forgot to read the definition there. And so there's a couple different things, so I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly here. One of which is docility, right? Foucault argues that we are not born docile, we are created through our experiences, through our lives, through our professional work history to be docile, to be instructed to do what it is we need to do. And so I argue that in the case of Severance, not only are their memories being split into two distinct selves, but the severance chip takes that a step further and reconfigures the disposition of the innies to be more docile, to be more juvenile. And so in this scene here, in this GIF, Mark has, I believe, stood up to a superior, to Miss Cobell, for the first time. He's asking her, what is the work we're doing? Why don't we know what we're doing here? Why are we kept in the dark? Things like that. And then Cobell snaps at him and scolds him and reminds him of why they're there. And Mark's response is he's taken aback. And I argue that it's a very similar situation to when you're a kid, right? And a parent, adult, somebody in a position of power who's older than you and bigger than you yells at you. Right? Your response is you're taken aback, but you're also flooded with these emotions that you're perhaps feeling for the first time, right? And case in point, Mark is, reconfigured to be more docile, as Innie is, and he's never been yelled at by a superior before. And so his eyes become glassy, he becomes kind of, he's kind of shaking, but he's still holding strong in his position of asking this question, because this is at the point in the show where he is starting to become disillusioned with the company and is starting to actually ask questions where him at the beginning of the show maybe would not have. And so this gets into an idea of workplace motivation and another form of corporate culturalism or corporate culturalization. Every employee has a different motivation when they're at work, whether it be their kids, their family, their home life, sports, anything like that, right? In the case of the severed employees, they don't really have a lot of that, right? Because all of their memories are gone. All of their personal memories are gone. So they can't, show up to work and say, hey, how was the game last weekend? Or what did you do? How was that vacation you went on? All of that is gone. But getting back to motivation for a second, incentives are a utility that the severed floor uses with the employees. And I argue that out of the MDR employees, Dylan is the one who's most motivated by these incentives. And a great example of this is when he's talking to Helly and explaining what these incentives are for the first time. And you can tell in his voice that he is not only proud of the incentives that he's already earned, but of the upcoming refiner of the quarter, when that person is named. He thinks it's going to be him. He knows it's a lock. He's like, I've got this. Don't even try to take it from me. You just started. I've been here longer. And refiner of the quarter also gets you your own waffle party. So that's a reason why Dylan is motivated by these incentives. He draws a sense of purpose from them. And so another example of this is a term that I have created, which is called egonism. And so egonism is a religion or theology that Lumen and the Severed Floor have created in order to further this idea of corporate culturalism, right? And so out of these employees, Irving is the one who draws a sense of purpose from egonism. And so a great example of this is when Irving suggests to the rest of his department to go to the perpetuity wing, which is basically this room that is a shrine to Lumen, a shrine to the Egan family. And while they're walking around, Helly is still, like we've already talked about, disillusioned by the company that she is now forced to work for. And Irving walks up to her at one point and tries to console her and says, you know, when I first woke up on the Severed Floor, I didn't feel like I was a person. I felt empty. I felt like I didn't have a sense of purpose or a sense of direction. And then I started to learn about the company that I work for, and I started to learn about the Egan and the Lumen history, and then I was able to find my sense of purpose in that. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, how does Irving know for a fact that Lumen is doing good in the world? How does he know? Well, the truth is he doesn't, right? He has to believe, you know, the corporate culturalism that he is kind of a victim of as well in order to find his sense of purpose. And so next up we have memory. We kind of already talked about this, but like we said, memory work is this idea that memories play an important role in the construction of ourselves. But there's an interesting part is innies are only as old as the amount of time that they've worked at Lumen, right? From the moment they wake up, they are a new person. They have no idea who they are in the outside world. And this also means that their memory archive, that is their collection of inherited or created memories, is limited by all of the memories that they create within the Severed Floor. And so this gets into an idea of memory capital, which is this idea that memories can be valuable or can hold value. And even further, it gets into this idea of severed memory capital, which is the value placed on memories that are possessed by the other version of themselves, right? So there's a moment where Innie Dylan is awoken in a closet, and Milchick is standing across from him and is interrogating him because he thinks that Dylan stole something from the Severed Floor. And so as Dylan starts to realize that he's in a closet in his house at home, a child runs in, hugs him, and calls him dad. And in that moment, there's this shift, immediate paradigm shift with Dylan, where he no longer cares about the incentives that once motivated him, gave him a sense of purpose on the Severed Floor. He's now motivated by the fact that he's learned something about his Audi and he wants to know more. So this goes back to this idea of severed memory capital, where, you know, I argue that some memories held by Dylan's Audi might not hold as much value or potential value as might be held by his Innie, right? Case in point, you know, this might be something that his Audi takes for granted. And so it is something that I argue is something where I completely lost my train of thought. I apologize. Oh my gosh. It's a lot of talking, I promise. We're getting there. After Annie Dillon sees his son and he's awoken back up on the severed floor, he starts explaining to the rest of his coworkers about his experience. And he basically tells them, he's my son and I'm never going to get a chance to see him again. He calls him his son, even though Irving at some point says, well, it's your Audi's son, it's not your son. And that gets in this idea of memory capital as well, where he's starting to, want to reach for as many memories of who he is on the outside as possible. And so to reiterate, workplaces are one of the most universal human experiences, right? I love this quote from Fisk where he says, realism in television does not just reproduce reality, it makes sense of it, right? This idea of severed labor isn't just a collection of new concepts, old concepts, and how they play into Severance. It helps us contextualize the workplaces that we might work in all the time. In ideas of human enhancement. I saw an article the other day that said that Apple is planning to implant human chips into people's brains in order to allow them to control Apple devices. So this isn't something that is like years or decades, this is happening right now, right? And to that end, what are the biopolitical ramifications of that? What are the bioethical ramifications of that? How much of our lives are we letting our corporations and our companies and our jobs take from us? How much are we letting them tip that scale, tip that balance between our work and our personal lives? And so, to reiterate, severed labor isn't just a collection of existing concepts and new concepts. It helps us to make sense of the workplaces in our society today. And in that, Severance offers a mysterious and important way in which to view it. Thank you.
Cole, I think you're more than capable of running your Q&A sessions.
Cool.
So, yeah, we'd love to take some questions specifically from the audience.
Andres?
Oh, me? Cool.
Yeah.
First of all, good job.
Thank you.
Good job. And when you were looking at biopolitics, I'm just really curious, did you look at class within that? Because I feel like there's a lot of class-ish struggles going on. Just within the
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I never did.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. That's a great, yeah.
I just, because it sounds like Audi versus.
No, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I think I kind of did a little bit through, kind of what I was just talking about with, this biopolitical, I think I might have used the word class at some point, but I didn't
focus in on.
Yeah, I didn't really cover it in that much detail. I just kind of was like, there's a class divide, and this is kind of how it works. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, good
Hi.
job.
Thanks.
You mentioned at the end you cite the Fisk.
Mhm.
Is there a specific kind of framework or guiding methodology that you use in particular? Or how does Fisk connect to kind of what guided your analysis?
To be truthful with you, I pulled that quote from the introduction, and so it was I don't entirely remember the article that it came from. I just remember it stood out to me, and I was like, oh, this is a really great quote that kind of helps, support these concepts. And I guess that kind of goes into the entire paper was kind of led by, like I said, kind of a collection of these concepts and methods. So there wasn't really like a clear kind of one guiding method or theory that I used. I mostly went off of Foucault, and I kind of brought that up a little bit with docility and stuff like that. But for the most part, I used kind of a hybridized collection of a bunch of different things. Yeah.
Another question. For corporate culturalism, you said veganism. It's a religion within
Mhm.
Lumen. Is that motivated by incentives within the organization, or is it just
So it's another form of it's another tool that they use, or another utility that they use to corporate culturalize,
Yeah.
I guess would be the term.
Mhm.
And then yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Any others? Not all at once. Yeah.
How would you relate this idea of egonism to real-world workplaces?
That's a great question. A lot of people online consider this kind of egonism concept to like cults. There's a lot of cult-like imagery that the show uses, and as much as I thought about kind of mentioning that, it wasn't entirely something that I wanted to delve too deeply into, because there's a lot of, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff at play in the show. I truly believe you could write about 100 thesis papers on this one show and not run out of ideas. There's just that much content in there. Yeah.
When it comes to memory capital, I've been going over in my head how to like phrase this, because you see a lot of, especially in the second season, like deception of the Lumen employees that aren't severed know that the innies and the outies can't talk to each other, and so they're like playing them against each other, being like, oh well, your outie really wants to be here, and that's why you're here, all that kind of thing. And you see the use of like memory being used as a really big like power dynamic, not only among like the workers, but also when it comes to like the board of like no one knows who's on the board never talks. They're like, what is this? And like, did you explore kind of how that works with like corporations, like trying to like also deceive employees and use that against them?
Yes. So that was a part that I in early drafts of this presentation was going to include. It's this idea of like a black box society, which is this concept that I kind of touched on earlier on, where it's like their input and their output are not directly known to the public, and so we kind of talked a lot about like cybersecurity. And specifically with like banks, a lot of them use a lot of the same kind of techniques. And the book that I read about it also talks about how like a lot of social media platforms are not very transparent about the work that they're doing either, and how their stuff functions. So that is definitely covered. Yeah.
Any questions from our other committee members?
We'll do post-examination. If you were to continue this research, what is something that you would want to include that you weren't able to here?
Oh, that's a great question. I do kind of, because I'm like a film buff and TV buff at heart. I do think that there's plenty of like film and television specific things to analyze in the show. So I think that if I were to expand upon it, I would go into more detail about how the show was made, right? There was a thing that I kind of was thinking about in early stages of writing the paper, where the show was written and started to be produced right around the COVID pandemic, and then was shut down, and then came back into production. And during the filming, post-COVID, when they're all having to wear masks and social distance and all that stuff, there's an interview where the actor who played Mark Adam Scott is being interviewed, and he's talking about the experience of that. And he talks about how the show was filmed on the East Coast, and he's from the West Coast, so he had to stay in an apartment while the show was being made. And so he talks about how he would wake up in an empty apartment because he has a wife and kids and stuff at home, and he'd get into a van that would take him to set, and the severed floor is basically all built out the way you see it in the show. So you have to walk through those hallways to get to the main like room where they work. And he talks about how there's a lot of like similarities between the show that they were making and his experience of going to work and social distancing, not being able to see people's faces with the masks, right? And so there's a lot of that. I think that would be one thing that I would definitely like to look at.
I think that's about all the time we have for questions, so that we can have some time for the committee to deliberate. At this time, we're going to ask that our public audience step outside for just a bit. We will call those of you who have time to hang around and return that bit.
Thank you for being here, everybody. I appreciate all of you. If anyone wants to grab lunch after this, I'm down.
Great job.
Good job.
I actually just sent an email so
Yep.
that you can just call me directly,
Oh, yeah.
and then I'm gonna have
On the employees area, all
the email, because I can't direct.
True.
I just questions after.
Yeah.
Yes,